Hi, my name is Ross Murray, the founding director of the Naming Project. For more than 18 years, the Naming Project has been a youth ministry for LGBTQ youth and their allies who want to support them. And LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. Since our founding, we've gotten questions from pastors and youth ministers about how best to do youth ministry with LGBTQ youth. And I've taken a lot of these questions and written a book called Made, Known, Loved, Developing LGBTQ-Inclusive Youth Ministry. That book should be available from Fortress Press in April of 2021. Okay, advertisement over. Yesterday, my colleague Logan led a workshop about the logistics of LGBTQ youth ministry. And this workshop goes a little bit beyond that. Outside of youth ministry, my day job and my calling as a deacon is at the LGBTQ advocacy organization, GLAAD. At GLAAD, we advocate for cultural acceptance of LGBTQ people, mainly through fair, accurate, and inclusive media representation. And my work at the Naming Project and GLAAD overlap occasionally. The media wants to tell the stories of LGBTQ youth and of LGBTQ people of faith. And I happen to have access to young LGBTQ people of faith who want to tell their stories with their parents' permission. And this workshop is a way to think beyond just what it means to be welcoming, but to actually advocate for a just world for LGBTQ youth to be able to live and move and have their being in the God who created them, knows them, and loves them just as they are. So, let's assume that you have made your youth ministry and your church a safe and affirming place for LGBTQ youth. Congratulations! Your congregation may be an oasis in an otherwise hostile world for LGBTQ youth. But there is more to do. Making your youth ministry safe and affirming for LGBTQ youth means ensuring that the ministries and the service providers that you work with are also affirming. And churches partner with a lot of organizations to enhance congregational youth ministry. Organizations that provide all the infrastructure for a mission trip. Organizations that send teams of musicians to your church to sing contemporary Christian music and liven up your church on a weeknight. I used to do those. Organizations that put on fun events designed to appeal to youth. But here's a really hard truth. Many of these organizations are not affirming of LGBTQ people. Most of the parachurch ministry organizations we work with come from an evangelical background, and the bulk of their business comes from evangelical churches. And of course, not all evangelical churches are anti-LGBTQ, but the ones that are really, really vocal about their anti-LGBTQ beliefs and policies. So it is up to you, the youth minister, the pastor, the consumer, to make sure that your church is working with organizations that will keep your LGBTQ youth safe, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. This will not be easy. Parachurch youth ministry programs have slick, effective marketing. They are much more media savvy than most of our churches, and quite frankly, more than the ELCA, And they've created a bubble that reinforces their worldview with television networks, magazines, and well-produced events with contemporary Christian music and engaging speakers. Your work as an affirming youth leader is to make absolutely certain that whatever ministry or organization you are partnering with is as safe for LGBTQ youth as you strive to make your own congregation. And this will mean asking hard questions. So let's take an example. Let's say your church is partnering with a parachurch ministry that organizes mission service trips. The parachurch ministry handles your housing and meals, trains your youth group in the task they'll be assigned, gets them out to their work sites, and then caps off every evening with worship and a program that helps them debrief their day and set it in context of Christian vocation to serve the neighbor. Noble work, right? So let's think through the questions that you need to ask. This is probably not a comprehensive list. And in fact, write your own questions down while I'm talking, and we can discuss them after this video. So, first set of questions. How are LGBTQ youth going to be treated in the registration process? What information is required about gender or gender identity? Are parents only listed as mother and father? Are there options for step parents? Are there options for two parents of the same sex? In questions about housing, if I have a transgender youth, where would they stay? And what if I have like 12 transgender youth? And what about housing for gay youth, bisexual youth, lesbian youth, youth that have two moms or two dads? Will my LGBTQ youth be around people they know and trust? Or are they going to be placed with strangers who might distrust them and maybe even harass them? What form do your bathrooms and your showers take? Like, how much privacy does everyone have? How crowded do the bathroom and showers get? And how does that work with your schedule? In the work assignments, are only boys allowed to do construction work while girls are packing food and reading to children? Or if part of the assignment is working with children, are LGBTQ youth or adult volunteers going to be prevented from working with children? On the work site, can LGBTQ youth be allowed to talk honestly about their lives with their coworkers? If they're asked about dating, can they safely talk about their significant other on work sites? And if there's a large program at the end of each day, what theology will ground that presentation? Who's leading or preaching? What's their theology? And is that theology compatible with ours, that I want my youth listening to it? What have the program leaders said about LGBTQ people in the past? Will LGBTQ people be explicitly condemned in a message, a sermon, or a devotion? So you might hear an underlying theme with all of these questions. Will LGBTQ youth feel safe and be safe participating in your program? There is power in asking these questions. Underpinning much of the anti-LGBTQ theology is an assumption that LGBTQ people and Christians are two separate communities and there is no overlap, or that these two exist in opposition to each other. And if you don't ask your questions, then no one will ever challenge that separatist and homophobic worldview. The program organizers need to know that the vocal anti-LGBTQ churches are not the only ones that want to use their programming. But be warned. In response to your questions, you might get some very carefully worded and non-specific answers. We welcome everybody is a great way to avoid having to have a difficult conversation. And that's why it's so important to be very specific in your questioning. We welcome everybody might just mean we'll take your money. It doesn't guarantee that your youth will feel safe, much less affirmed. It doesn't mean that LGBTQ adult volunteers aren't going to be safe or affirmed. It doesn't mean that gender stereotypes won't be reinforced. It doesn't mean that youth won't be forced into shared housing arrangements with a gender that they don't identify with and strangers who are making them feel uncomfortable. So, for the sake of your youth, have the courage to keep asking about specifics, thinking of every possible scenario where danger might lurk for LGBTQ youth. And then there's another set of questions that has to do with the affiliations of the organization. Make a separate list of these questions now before you find yourself facing a decision about working with an organization. Does any portion of your organization's budget go into programs or campaigns that are going to diminish legal protections for LGBTQ people? Has the organization supported anti-LGBTQ bills in Congress or in state legislatures, or their equivalent in another country? Has the organization's leaders or staff ever been associated with any high-profile anti-LGBTQ leaders? Do you have any LGBTQ staff? Does the organization have any affiliation with known anti-LGBTQ organizations? A few that you might have heard of are the Family Research Council, the American Family Association, or Focus on the Family. Those are not all of them, but that's just a couple. In short, you should be asking yourself, will our support of this ministry fund the harm of LGBTQ youth? And look, I know that you might be thinking that what I'm asking for is overkill. And maybe you've rolled your eyes at the LGBTQ culture wars over Chick-fil-A or Duck Dynasty or the Salvation Army. I'll tell you, in my day job at GLAD, I have been in the middle of all three of those fights. I know firsthand that people who oppose the reality and the existence of LGBTQ people are not just rolling their eyes and sitting back. They are calling our offices, leaving harassing voicemail messages. They're contacting businesses to tell them to stop supporting LGBTQ people. And they're excommunicating their own congregations if they get too welcoming. I'll tell you another story. In 2014, news leaked that the Christian humanitarian organization World Vision was exploring the possibility of making some employee benefits available to same-sex spouses of World Vision employees. As soon as the news broke, people were told, usually by their pastors, to pull their support for World Vision. In a day, 3,500 World Vision sponsorships of poor children were canceled. Within 2 days, World Vision felt enough pressure to reverse their decision and pulled any support of their LGBTQ employees or their family members. People invested in keeping LGBTQ people out of Christianity, out of its churches, and the organizations that support it are advocating for these harsh policies. These advocates are extremely vocal, intent on drowning out the faithful voices of inclusion. It is constant, and there is almost no opposition to it. Faithful Christians often unwittingly go along with it because we don't know any better, or the convenience of working these organizations just makes it seem worth it. And that brings me to the second part of this workshop. Our calling to LGBTQ Inclusive Youth Ministry goes beyond protecting the youth inside of our congregations. Our calling is to transform the world through the work of the gospel, not just our youth group. So from an LGBTQ perspective, transformation of the world is public advocacy. It means preaching about the danger of anti-LGBTQ bills and the need for protections for LGBTQ people and youth in general, and youth in particular. So 1 year ago, during last year's Extravaganza, bills that would ban transgender youth from participating in high school sports appeared in dozen state legislatures. The bill was signed into law in one state in Idaho, although it is under a court challenge right now. Other bills that were proposed include making it a felony for a doctor to provide transition-related care to LGBTQ youth. And some included reporting the parents of transgender youth to Child Protective Services, like it was child abuse. Laws like these were designed to punish those who love and support transgender youth, people like all of us in this workshop. Simply caring for and supporting LGBTQ youth is being made into a criminal act, often with the support of people who call themselves Christians. If parents and doctors of LGBTQ youth are targeted, there is no reason that churches cannot be targeted in the same way for accepting and supporting LGBTQ youth. And these bills are not being introduced in a vacuum. They are filed because loud voices are drowning out the expertise of doctors and counselors and teachers and social workers, and are instilling fear, confusion, and distrust about LGBTQ youth, especially transgender youth. Those who are leading the charge are claiming that their activism is rooted in Christianity, even while they attempt to impose a very un-Christ-like, rigid, black or white view of the world. Today, more than ever, our voices as Christian ministers are needed to change society so that your LGBTQ youth can be safe when they leave the walls of their church. This responsibility does not have to fall to you alone, but your leadership will be necessary. Your youth can be empowered to speak up, to tell their own story of coming out, or the story of their journey to being an ally. Parents can talking about wanting a world that's safe for their children, and what laws and cultural norms are going to be necessary to make the world a safe place for them. Pastors can infuse their messages with rich, life-generating theology. And any of us can invoke our most meaningful passage of Scripture to drive the point home that we are not speaking merely for ourselves, but are doing our part to fulfill Jesus' call to transform the world. And your church doesn't have to do it alone. Resources like LGBTQ advocacy groups now welcome both youth and faith leader participation. You can get involved in local or state level organizing, adding a Christian lens to the advocacy happening through statewide LGBTQ organizations. A church outing to a lobbying day or a rally is educational and empowering for everyone involved. And here's how. Imagine your statewide LGBTQ organization is having a rally in support of non-discrimination protections. First, spend time in study and prayer. Talk about what you value as a congregation, as a youth group. Look up the relevant stories in the Bible. Learn who's protected by these non-discrimination laws and who is left out. But your pre-work isn't done. Spend time planning your church presence. Make sure other people at the rally know that you are Christians supporting non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people. Maybe spend time making signs in the youth room, letting youth identify a Bible passage that supports non-discrimination. Wear your congregational shirts at the rally. And then, once you're at the rally itself, listen closely to the speakers and listen for statements of faith and values. And when the rally's over, debrief. Ask, what was empowering? What was difficult? Why might someone resist non-discrimination? What arguments might change their hearts? What reaction did you get as Christians at the rally? And then close in prayer, encompassing everything that you heard and saw and experienced. I know that such an activity can feel like a departure from what youth ministry is meant to be. But really, first of all, it's no more of a departure than a ski trip or a lock-in. Advocacy is a continued form to live out Jesus' Great Commission to proclaim the gospel to the ends of the earth. If your congregation is the only safe place around, youth will still be living in a dangerous world. This holy work makes the world safer for all youth, whether they're in our congregations or not. Amen. Thank you.